Welcome to All About Money on HK IBC. I'm Chloe Fong. While the mainland's labor market is worrying with high youth unemployment, Hong Kong's jobless situation eased after borders reopened and the economy improved. There are more vacancies with attractive starting salaries for new graduates in Hong Kong, and for those already working, over 60% received pay rises, as the average salary increase also rose to a 3-year high. So are you catching up with the trend, and what can you expect regarding pay? Today we're joined by Bill Lee, Managing Director of JobsDB Hong Kong, who will share some of his tips. So Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chloe. Happy to be here.
First thing first, let's talk about the latest recruitment features in terms of the salaries. So could you just briefly give us an overview about the latest salary adjustments in Hong Kong that have been observed from your company?
To provide some context for our viewers out there, we generally run a job seeker salary survey that is happen between February and March every year. And we have ran that for approximately 20 years. And then we take that data and we marry it against our internal recruitment data from the hirer side to build a comprehensive result and an observation finding. This year in particular, we noticed a couple of things. Number one, there are more respondents that reported a salary increase as well as bonus payments. And the quantum of improvement is also larger year on year. Specifically, the average pay rise is at 4.1%, the highest that we have seen over the past 4 years. And approximately 2/3 of respondents reported a pay increase versus roughly about half of last year. So what we feel is, overall, despite the overall global market uncertainties, the labor and employment market in Hong Kong is increasingly robust. And a couple of factors that is driving this result in particular. Firstly, I think it's a near-term structural imbalance in the labor market supply and demand. Secondly, there's a longer-term digital transformation at play.
Right.
And thirdly, this net outflow of workforce, that we're seeing in the market.
So actually, we're requiring more laborers in Hong Kong because of the previous COVID situation, and we have the immigration wave. And interestingly, if we see about, for example, the job markets in the US, there are many big tech companies are cutting staff, whereas in Hong Kong, we're actually recruiting more, especially for the workforce in the tech sectors as well. Tell us, what are the sectors that have seen the biggest pay rises in Hong Kong?
So we're seeing, in particular, the digital-related skills, digital-related job functions, things such as analytics, social media, e-commerce, AI, information technology, reporting about a 6 to 10% year-on-year increase in terms of pay rise. Now, what we are seeing, therefore, is that this is a reflection of the broader term, long-term trend of digital transformation, whereby there is, during the pandemic, there's an acceleration of digital transformation, and that momentum continued after, resulting on higher demand for this type of talents. And because there's a structural shortage of supply, and this is essentially driving up the salary, with employers willing to pay more to attract and retain these talents.
Right. Are there any features that were also reflected in the age groups as well, in terms of the pay rises?
Yeah, broadly speaking, we see that those that are in the early and entry-level career, basically those that are less than 10 years work experience, having a higher salary increase versus those in their mid to their latter part of the career. But this is to be broadly expected, as they are operating from a lower base. What is interesting though, is that we see as we drill down, in the 26 to 30-year-old segment, there's about a 5.9% increase in terms of salary. And we figured that this is primarily because, this group of cohort, which is those who were born in the 90s, were probably digitally native. They grew up in that environment. They probably don't understand what is a typewriter, born into the internet. And they are probably best able to capture the changes that come with the digital transformation, whether it's the new roles that are created or, a changing skills requirement in the traditional roles. For example, if you're in finance or HR, you probably still need to understand how the new tools and technology impact the workplace. If you want to hire somebody, which is a software developer, you will at least need to know how to conduct interviews there. if you're running, finance, you probably need to understand how the business operate and how, digital tools impact, your inflow and outflow of your business. Yeah.
Right. So the digital natives are actually taking a great advantage of their, natural talent as well with the current digital era. And now, although we're seeing an average of 4.1% rise in terms of salaries in 2023, marking the highest level in 3 years, that's still roughly we're catching up with the previous heydays level, isn't it? So when do you expect us to really see the salary increase return to its better days, for example, in 2018 before the COVID and the social unrest?
When we take a broader look in the last 15 years, the average pay increase in Hong Kong, with the exception of the global financial crisis and the COVID years, roughly I think it's been oscillating between 3.5% to 6%. So 4.1% this year puts us firmly within range. Now, obviously, there are multiple factors determining the average pay increase, with the labor market supply and demand one of them. The other part, obviously, being the market, global macro environment. And I think here, it remains to be seen what's happening in the next 1 year or so, whether, the macro environment, is driving up. But we do see that the Hong Kong government, putting in initiatives such as, the border reopening, consumption voucher, and I think that should give a boost to the market economy overall.
And especially for some sectors like retail sales, tourism, they're also seeing increased labor engagement as well. And speaking of the job switching trend, earlier during the pandemic, we've seen actually a great wave of the resignation. And some US media has been reporting that now, after the COVID situation subsides, the great resignation wave has eased. I'm not sure if this situation also applies to Hong Kong or not. What is your observation so far?
Generally, I think in Asia, we do not necessarily see a great resignation wave. I think that's very, very much a Western construct. What we do see, though, in the Asian market and as well as Hong Kong is this great reconfiguration, whereby there is a increased acceleration of digital transformation, but there's insufficient talent supply to cater for that, and that's what we see they're driving the increased salary there. And also this structural imbalance. You have a situation whereby a lot of people unfortunately left the industries for F&B, travel, etc. during the pandemic years, and now as the border reopen, there's an increased demand for these particular sectors, but there's a short-term, insufficient supply coming back into it. Yeah.
But do you see more people wanting to switch their jobs in Hong Kong?
Definitely. What we do see is, this is definitely increasing. In particular, I think among the younger segments, we are very interestingly seeing the average tenure of a person in a role has dropped from about 24 months to 21 months. And this is particularly interesting, I think, in the younger cohorts between 18 to 25, whereby the average tenure has dropped down to only 1.5 years. For those in the 18 to 22 segment, it's down to only 9 months. What I think this reflects is the fact that, among the younger generation, they actually, want more control over their career. They're probably, used to near instant gratification. And, they want to learn something quickly. They want to see results quickly. And they basically are more proactive in their job search and movement between jobs.
Can we interpret that they're also more aggressively as well in terms of the job hunting or job switching situation?
Yeah, and that means, it's an increasing challenge, right, for the HR practitioners out there and the businesses out there. Because this cohort is only going to grow over the years. And, HR practitioners need to find the right policies to be able to attract them, retain them, demonstrate career growth, so that this particular cohort, can continue, within this particular company, for their future growth.
Among the different factors, other than for example, more salaries as one of the incentives for them to switch jobs, another situation is from your company's report suggesting that the expectation gap between employees and employers also widened over the past 3 years. Can you also tell us more about that? How this expectation widened?
Yeah, very interestingly, I think 2 major insights there. Firstly, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, the one major trend is that employees are increasingly looking towards work-life balance. That's the top 3 consideration of them staying or moving to a different role. And when we drill down to that, we notice that it's primarily about flexible work arrangements. About 70% of the respondents felt that they wanted this hybrid work arrangement, remote work arrangements, flexible work arrangement to continue as a permanent work policy post-pandemic. However, from the hirer side, where last year we saw approximately 69% of hirers adopting this policy, this year that number has gone down to 32%. So they are seeing this as a pandemic-era policy. They're trying as much as possible to return to office policy. This is creating a gap. And here, I think, ultimately it's up to the hirers, to decide what's best for the company and business and how to keep the employees engaged. But this is something they can look into. The second thing to note, though, is that employees have increased expectations on reskilling and upskilling post-pandemic because they feel they need to continuously improve themselves to be more relevant as a future workforce. Up to 77% of respondents felt that, and this is particularly true for the younger segment, that they want training, staff training, right? And this is something I think employers can tap into as benefits, again, to retain and attract talents.
All right, thank you very much for your thoughts, Bill. We'll take a short break for now, but coming up next, we'll have more discussions on the future of work models in Hong Kong, so do stay tuned. Welcome back to All About Money on HKIBC. I'm Chloe Fung. Today we are discussing the job market dynamics in Hong Kong for you, whether you are an employee or an employer. Workers have become more ambitious this year, seeking higher wages and benefits according to local surveys. But there are also other important considerations, such as healthy work-life balance or flexible working hours. Now, there's also an ongoing battle between bosses and workers over the remote work arrangements after COVID. So how can the two sides find common ground? Bill Lee, Managing Director of JobsDB Hong Kong, can provide insights on how to deal with this tricky situation. So Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. In addition to the above factors, work stress was also highlighted from your company's report. Could you also tell us more about the major causes of the increased workload after COVID and how this factor could also affect the recruitment market as well?
Sure, Chloe. So firstly, I think we saw about more than 90% of the respondents reported that the work stress has increased. And up to 43% felt that it has actually gone up after the pandemic, which is a bit surprising for us. When we drill into the numbers, we felt that there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, I think as business reopen and business activity pick up post-pandemic, it is very likely that there's increased workload on the existing employees. And because it's difficult to hire, and therefore a lot of the workloads and stress goes into that particular existing employees. Second thing is I think as businesses go through this digital transformation, as they experiment, they try to expand new markets, it is very likely they probably pick the top talents within their organization to try and experiment and try this. And that means increased workload again for these talents in their organization. Now, a couple of things, therefore, I think, advice, for the employer's perspective, how to handle this. Firstly, I think it's important for employers to lean in and really engage the employees on the workload and the capacity that they can carry. Secondly, I think, when it comes to learning and development, upskilling and reskilling, they really can provide those tools to help their employees transition. I think a lot of this is primarily due to adoption anxiety. If they can demonstrate value, show how they can transition with adopting new tools, this should reduce overall stress. And thirdly, most importantly, is if they can adopt this hybrid flexible work arrangement, definitely I think it can help overall employee well-being. Having a consistent policy, therefore, I think is really, really important.
You mentioned about the new tools and also probably the other possible work arrangements. What do you think will be the future of work? There has been this kind of ongoing battle between bosses and workers because many workers are reluctant to go back to their daily office work. And according to the global office design consultancy Unispace, it found that 60% of the city's employees were reluctant to go back to the daily office work, and the figure was higher than the global average of about 50%. So what is your opinion on such an issue? I mean, how can these two find the common ground? You mentioned about the hybrid work arrangement. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so there are some parts of the UNICEF report that I think we agree, some part we disagree. And I think where we agree is Hong Kongers generally want to have flexible work arrangement. Now, when you look into the details of flexible work arrangement, it can range from being back to office but having flexible leave, all the way to hybrid work mode, all the way to fully remote or 4 days a week, right? What is true, though, that we see in our report is that Hong Kongers overwhelmingly prefer a hybrid work arrangement, a 3+2, 2+3, that arrangement. And this is something which is consistent and is a lot higher than the global average. Now, why we think that is the case is because in Hong Kong, I think the general commute time is lower relatively to other markets.
Right.
Number two, the living space at home isn't necessarily conducive for long-term, work from home. We have small living space. And thirdly, I think overall, Hong Kongers prefer the face-to-face interaction. And I think, that's why I think it's important for hirers and employers, wherever possible, to adopt hybrid, because, ultimately this can improve engagement. And we are seeing it, even in our own company, where we have adopted a permanent approach, permanent policy for hybrid, and we have seen, sustained productivity and higher employee engagement.
What are the other well-being policies that could be adopted by the companies to also, retain staff or entice staff as well, other than the hybrid work mode?
So some of those things, would be things like, perks in the office, right? We are seeing, a situation whereby, as hybrid becomes more and more popular, a lot of the companies, looking towards, downsizing their office space, but, reorientating the ratio of the office space between, office desks as well as, collaboration workspace. That ratio may come down from 90-10 or 80-20 up to, to 50-50. And essentially, those are some of the benefits to basically encourage people to return to office on some days without necessarily putting a high financial burden on the company to maintain a large office space. The other things that we are seeing, though, is that, companies adopting this, learning and development, training, reskilling, upskilling to basically meet the expectations of the employees.
Right. What about the 4-day work week? Do you think it could be possible in Hong Kong now that there's a global testing situation that's ongoing as well, because dozens of countries, including Ireland, Spain, and the UK, have tested a 4-day work week. Do you think this could be possible in Hong Kong?
Now, I am aware of the testing that's done in the European markets. I understand it's still early stage trial and they don't really necessarily have a mass adoption. So whether that becomes a mass adoption remains to be seen. I've also heard of Hong Kong employers taking this trial. And very much, ultimately at this point, I think it's very much in the experimental stage. It's possible, maybe, for some segments, but ultimately I think it's up to the employers and, employees to decide through a mutual engagement.
Do you think it is really beneficial, for example, as some companies reported that it improved productivity, morale, and team culture? What is your own opinion on this?
So taking a Seek or JobsDB lens to it, when we did a 3+2, definitely we are seeing that, increased morale, increased satisfaction, and an increase in engagement survey scores. Actually, to be fair, I think we are one of the more early adopters of this. Back in 2019, when we decided to adopt this policy, and also, build a new office, we have decided, very much there's more collaborative space, and it has proven to be, successful in terms of our internal results. So we're quite happy with that.
And speaking of the skills, how the employees can upgrade their personal skills or, for example, certifications as well, another probably tool we can look into is an AI tool as well, because now there's increasing fears about the artificial intelligence and its impact on the job market. And according to the recent Goldman Sachs study, it found that the generative AI tools could in fact impact 300 million full-time jobs worldwide, and it could lead to a significant disruption in the job market. What is your own opinion about the AI's impact on the job market, and how, for example, the companies could integrate the AI tools into employees' daily work procedures and process?
Well, this is such a rich topic that warrants such a bigger discussion. But I think, overall perspective, it's important for us to take a backseat first. AI is not a new technology. It's been here for many, many years, about a decade.
Right.
What is true is that generative AI over the past year has gotten a lot of news and media attention, and rightly so. AI as a tool, employers have used it, to essentially handle manual, repetitive tasks and ensuring more productivity. We have seen this, for example, chatbots, mobile banking, to basically handle the first level customer inquiries before they forwarded it to manned, customer service teams. Now that's definitely beneficial. However, for employers to continue adopting this technology, especially generative AI in the future, there are a couple of considerations. Firstly, they need to ensure that it's accurate. Number two, they need to ensure quality. And thirdly, they need to consider the ethical considerations as well, because a lot of data, maybe private data, is fed into it before it can generate results. Now, you look at one recent example in the United States, pretty famous test case whereby a legal firm used ChatGPT to generate reference cases in an aviation lawsuit. Those references were subsequently proven to be false and didn't exist. So the question, therefore, is that how does company ensure that there's right practices in place to make sure this is properly adopted? And this is where I think the employees will move from being generative content to being gatekeepers of those content. But then this represents a double-edged sword for the employees, right? Do you coexist or do you learn new skills? And I think this is where Hong Kongers can take a more proactive approach. Adopt those technologies, reskill, upskill, whether it's in utilizing those technologies or learning how to use that technology in your everyday work. This is where I was talking about earlier. Finance people, maybe can learn about how to use tools as part of their everyday work, right? If you're a business person, running strategy, you need to qualify whether that data is right or not before you make that decision, right? Ultimately, though, for a market like Hong Kong, which is labor short, having an additional option in the table is not necessarily a bad thing.
But still, it's we're still at a starting point or starting stage in terms of the AI usage now. But do you see that people who understand AI or can make good use of AI tools accurately and ethically would have better, for example, promotion possibilities or better pay rise in the future compared with those who do not understand AI?
Definitely, definitely. This is the same, I think, with the situation maybe 30 years ago, right? Like, with the adoption of computer, people were saying, maybe the secretaries will go out of work. But it's actually not. It's the secretaries that do not adopt how to use computers that will probably be, out of work. So as long as you continue remaining relevant to the upcoming technology, then you should be fine. Actually, you should benefit from it.
So we should definitely catch up the trend by learning more about AI now to improve our competitiveness as well.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time, but before we go, I want to know your thoughts about the job market situation, especially on its outlook later on this year and probably next year. And what would be your advice for the job seekers and companies when it comes to the recruitment process? For job seekers, maybe how can they strike better deals? And for companies, how can they maximize their recruitment finances as well?
So firstly, I think we're optimistic about the recruit market this year and next year. Secondly, I think with the digital talents, I think it's part of a longer trend. They should still be in demand and continuously so. As to regards our advice for the employees as well as employers, I think firstly, employees should constantly remain relevant, read into latest salary trends, what's happening with the industry, etc. And then decide for themselves, how to equip, learn, reskill, to take advantage of this opportunity. Having said that, even though there are more opportunities out there, be careful to know what you go into the next role, just to make sure it fits into your own requirements, whether it's the company culture, the pay packages, work-life balance, to make sure it's right for you. From the employer's perspective, adopt those learnings, adopt those findings. Hybrid, flexible work arrangements important. Learning and development as a tool to capture and attract, retain talent is important as well. So that's our advice.
All right, thank you so much, Bill. It's a great pleasure speaking to you today. That's Bill Lee, Managing Director at JobsDB Hong Kong, and thank you for watching All About Money. We'll be back next Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. So until the next time, see you then.